Bob Herbert's OpEd.tv is made possible in part by the CUNY TV Foundation with the support of Ann Ulnick. Hi, I'm Bob Herbert. Welcome to OpEd.tv. We hear a lot about driverless cars. They're going to reduce accidents and save lives. They'll ease congestion and reduce harmful emissions. And they'll get you to your destination while you're playing video games or watching a movie or catching a nap in the back seat. What's not to like? Well, what happens if the computer operating your driverless car is hacked, which can happen easily? Suddenly, the hacker is in control of your vehicle. And how well will these marvelous autonomous cars and trucks perform on badly paved roads that are not clearly marked, or when traffic lights are not properly functioning, or when something truly unexpected occurs, like a car careening across a highway divide and approaching head-on, or violent criminal activity? We'll take a look at the pros and cons of driverless vehicles with my guest, Jamie Lincoln Kitman, a lawyer and the New York bureau chief for Automobile Magazine. Jamie, welcome. Thanks for coming in. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
So a lot of people think of driverless vehicles almost as a panacea for our highway ills, and they insist that they are much safer than cars operated by motorists. So a two-part question. One, do you agree that they are a lot safer? And then the second part is whether you agree or not, what are some of your concerns about the safety of driverless vehicles?
Right. I think, there's no doubt that human error is a big factor in many accidents. So the promise of a car that was driven by a computer that, was cold and calculating and never made any mistakes and was taking all the data in at the right time and processing it intelligently and soberly, that has to be an advantage over a lot of the people who are out on the road today. Right. However, I think that in general, the debate thus far has understated what some of the risks are and some of the problems and exactly where we are along in the technological process. But even assuming that all of it goes according to plan and as quickly as some might hope. I mean, there are people who say we're going to see fully automated cars within 5 years. Other people say it's going to be more like 15 or 20, and then only in certain places. Right. Perhaps that's more realistic. But even assuming all that, I think there are some downsides that concern me, just as a student of automobiles and technology and driving and all those types of things that we worry about at car magazines.
In an op-ed that you did for the New York Times, you said that even assuming things go well, that on occasion we would see with driverless cars accidents that were far more serious and more grisly than we're used to seeing. What kind of things were you talking about?
Well, I mean, it's easy to imagine, a whole area of road, for instance, like, falling out of communication or sending out some bad information and a lot of wrong assumptions be made as a result. I mean, I joke in the piece that, you just know that one day that 1,200 people are going to get off to go to the same parking spot at the food court at the Vince Lombardi service area, in the same millisecond, and it will be a terrible accident, and a lot of people will die. I mean, in theory, it should cut down a lot of the kind of single car accidents where a driver falls asleep and goes off the road, where they start looking at their phone and they crash. But those kind of like large accidents are particularly scary. There's also a period that will certainly exist where you have driverless cars sharing the roads with old-fashioned driver cars, and people can make some spectacular mistakes that may overcome the computer's ability to react quickly.
The first known death in a driverless vehicle occurred in 2016. what happened there? This was a Tesla vehicle and driven by a big-time advocate of driverless cars.
Right. He was watching a movie, and in my estimation, I think he took the the claims made for driverless cars a little too seriously, and he was not paying attention. The car was unable to spot what I believe was the trailer of a white tractor trailer that somehow was jackknifed across the side of the road, and he went into it at high speed, killing himself, and while watching a movie. That's certainly, without getting too huffy about it, I think it points out the limits to the technology as it exists today. There are, you're relying on cameras and radar, and to the extent that those can be faked out or confused, you're really at risk.
When the advocates talk about sort of the wonders of driverless cars, and I am not opposed to technology by any means. I don't want to go back to typewriters and carbon paper in the newspaper business, for example. But when they talk about them, they never talk about some of the problematic aspects of it. And I keep thinking about the kind of things that you cannot program a computer for. So, for example, you're traveling down a highway, as I once did in Tennessee, and you can see a tornado off in the distance, and then you can react however you react. Or, there could be criminal activity or a riot down the road, and you could say, well, it's not a great idea to continue proceeding. But if you're in the back seat taking a nap, can we rely on a computer to make those kinds of decisions?
It's very easy to imagine situations where the computer did not have adequate information. And I'm sure backers would say that, in this glorious future, there will be vast amounts of information, more than you could ever know. I mean, certainly one of the good things we know about driverless cars is they could, as you approach an intersection, they could know that out of your sight, a car is approaching at an excessive rate of speed, or is approaching but planning to stop, and it would know all that stuff, and that could make for orderly interchanges. But we do know, for instance, that at the current state of technology, things like snow and rain and condensation, or little fender benders can damage cameras and render them useless or less than useful, and that could be a real problem. I mean, certainly in the near term, they're going to need even more high-tech technology that will, allow it to be used in all kinds of weather and light conditions.
What should we be doing about some of these uncertainties? I mean, it doesn't seem like there's much oversight as the technology is being developed.
Yeah.
Who should be responsible, and what should they be doing?
Well, I mean, the government, the National Highway Transportation Safety Agency, has been working to promulgate rules, and which, ultimately I think that's a good idea. You can't just go, well, this is, we're not sure about this technology, so we're just going to let them do whatever they want. On the other hand, I would say that what we can do and what we are doing are probably different. What we are doing is pretty much almost a fait accompli that this is happening. There will be driverless cars. The government supports it. The government is accepted as just completely true. The idea that they'll save gas, they'll save lives, they'll lower emissions, they'll lower congestion, all possible benefits. But my suggestion is that we spend a lot more time thinking about, is this a really good idea? Is the technology really ready? And most importantly, is this the best use of capital, human and financial? If we take all the engineers that it's going to take to figure this out, is this the best thing for them to be doing? You could argue that, really coming up with clean energy would be a better idea. You could certainly argue that things like mass transit and people moving generally require massive further investment and much more study about, modern and efficient ways to run the railroads. I mean, our railroads are from the 19th century. And my concern overall is that this is really another one of those cases where the there's the possibility of a new industry that's going to create a lot of wealth. People get really excited about it, as with the railroads. And the government basically takes the role of like, let us help you do this. Certainly there's near midterm pot of gold for the people who are most excited about automating our cars. But what happens in the future, that's kind of secondary to making the money now.
Let's address the issue of hacking. So these cars are completely computerized vehicles, and I think even some people in the industry are acknowledging that hacking is a potential
risk.
Is a potential problem. Talk about that a little bit. What are some of the obvious?
Well, they already know. They already know that current cars with their I mean, it's a truism that by like the year 2000, a single car had as much computing power as the entire Apollo moon mission. And this is an exponential order of that we're talking about here. But they already know that with the computers that are in cars now, that somebody remotely can stop, steer the cars. They can make it accelerate. They can lock its brakes. They can throw it out of control. So it's not too hard to imagine that there will be criminal and terrorist elements who will do that on an individual basis. They're going to rob this person, and they can just pull you off wherever they wanted and steer your car there, and you'd be stuck. You could, if you were of a particularly dastardly terrorist bent, you could probably, by messing with some receptors or signals, divert an entire highway, or you could just stop, 50 cars, and carnage would ensue. So that's at a minimum, it would be a huge nuisance, and it's almost too frightening to contemplate. Thus far, nobody's made anything ever that can't be cracked into in the realm of computers and so forth. So it's hard to imagine that they're going to make something that's that safe now. I mean, right now there are some kind of good guy hackers who keep showing the car companies every time they say they fixed it that it's not really fixed, that they can still hack it.
Is there anyone paying very serious attention to these kind of potential problems? What might happen in terms of criminal behavior or behavior by terrorists?
There's some academics that are following it. I would say that when the Congress has had hearings, people have tried to bring it up. Senator Markey from Massachusetts was looking to have some protocols established that would govern the anti-hacking capabilities of cars in the regulations that were being discussed, and none of the companies who in general were happy to be regulated kind of gives them a green light in a way, tells them the rules of the road. But they didn't really want to talk about that part of it, which was not encouraging.
In your op-ed, you talked about a particularly harrowing hypothetical situation. You said, imagine a constable or a police type of some sort hacks into your car and decides that you need to be brought to the station house for questioning. Right. So,
I mean, that's really a hop and a skip from the current state of the law. So I would be seriously worried about from a civil libertarian perspective. The risks seem like very high,
Well, if there were a terror situation, for example, you can very easily imagine the government saying, this is the kind of thing we need to do. You could see the argument. I mean, we have these terror truck accidents. Well, they're not accidents, terror truck attacks nowadays, where several people have been killed and that sort of thing, where you could imagine the government saying, well, if they could get control of that kind of a vehicle, certainly the public would say, well, you need to get control of it. Right. But then how do you keep that within any kind of reasonable bounds of civil liberties? Yeah.
I mean, it's a real issue. I mean, it's interesting on the broader subject of driverless cars and the attendant liability issues, which have been supposedly one of the things that have slowed them down to this point, is that the car companies were just concerned, even as they introduced things like like a radar-controlled cruise control, so that if you're going 70 and you come up on a car that's going 50,
right,
it'll automatically slow you down. And they were late to introduce that, and they said it was liability issues.
What happens if there is an accident in a completely autonomous vehicle? But I don't know, a pedestrian gets hit by a car and that sort of thing. How do you determine liability in a situation like that?
Those are going to be real issues, and as you know, the industry has been very concerned about liability. I think one of the things that makes them happy that the government is going to regulate them is that they'll then be able to say, well, you know, we followed the regulations, so we're not liable. But interestingly, just on the discussion of a lot of the technologies, I heard I think it was a Google spokesman when somebody was fretting about, you know, how are they ever going to figure out all these legal issues, and they said, well, you know, we have a very robust legal system, and you know, it's up to any challenge like this, and by they'll figure them out. But there will be legal issues, and there are morality issues too. There's a lot of situations when you're driving a car where, you know, it's like, do I kill one pedestrian,
right,
or do I kill 6 teenagers in a car? If I kill the baby, should I have killed the 87-year-old who was crossing the street instead? I mean, those are the decisions that ultimately your car or your computer is going to be making for you. And you know, they're kind of grim choices often, and they're, you know, and really who is making those decisions? It's not like I'm particularly excited to reserve the risk for myself to decide whether I want to kill the baby or the old lady, but it's, you know, I mean, that's the kind of thing computers will be deciding.
I can even imagine a simpler situation where you might be the danger of hitting a pedestrian, for example, and your alternatives are to collide with another vehicle, or perhaps go up on a sidewalk and collide with a tree or a telephone pole or something like that. How is that determination made by a computer? It's the kind of thing you need a human brain.
And the analogy has been made to the automatic pilots of planes, which, you know, are very helpful often, but I think is the general belief of pilots that and airlines that you really need somebody who really knows how to fly, because sometimes the automatic pilot could get faked out. I mean, that the Air France crash in Brazil, that was an example of it, of where it's just, you just need somebody. But, you know, paradoxically, under the regime where we're all driven by our cars, you know, whatever, you know, minimal level of driving skill the average American has today, I mean, you could assume that's going to get worse, because they're, you know, they'll be in the back partying and not paying attention to the road, and suddenly they're called in to start paying attention. I mean, that, you know, that's the state of the technology today. Certainly that's where they have the experiments with Uber cars and stuff like that. They always have a driver who's sitting there just in case it goes wrong. And of course, one of those cars has already been hit and flipped over. So, you know, it's certainly in the near term, there's going to be a lot of, you know, accidents.
Why is there such a push, both inside and outside of the industry, to get to completely driverless vehicles? Why not have these autonomous vehicles, but insist that someone qualified, someone with a license, actually be behind the wheel? Why does it have to be driverless?
Well, I think we will see an intermediate period perhaps, where there has to be a qualified driver behind the wheel. It is a question of how qualified they are and how distracted they're going to become. You know, people are way too distracted already.
I agree.
And they don't even have driverless cars. Nobody says like you can just watch TV and drive, you know, for the most part. So that is a concern. To go back to your original question, I mean, I think that there's several factors at work, but one of them is just, you know, the natural desire and curiosity of industry and scientists and technologists to just do the greatest. I mean, why climb to the top of Mount Everest when you could climb to the the top of one of the Catskills, because it's there. So there's that element. There's also, you know, there's a lot of money that flows into this, both government money, military money, and stuff like that. I mean, one of the drivers of this technology has been DARPA, you know, the defense research programs that fund things, and they want to have, you know, unmanned combat vehicles that will go ahead and blow things up and, sweep mines or whatever.
Much easier for me to understand than driverless cars on Route 80.
That does tend to make a lot of sense. But I think you have this intersection of several different corporate interests, which, primarily are, the technology companies, the Googles and Apples, the automobile industry itself, which is feeling old and in the way, and then the marketers who will be able very much to use this type of car to their advantage. I mean, if nothing else, people are going to spend an extra 2 or 4 hours a day on their gadget or on their phone. They'll be able to shop. They'll be able to social network. You'll be able to advertise to them nonstop because it won't be a distraction. So those things together, I think they feel like there's a lot of money, and there's no doubt that in this period where there was a moment 10 years ago that the government could have said, or the industry could have decided for itself, it's too dangerous for people to be driving cars when they're using their cell phones. So we are going to push to have cell phones disabled when you're in your car. It has to be. The technology exists to do that cheaply. So why not do that? Well, they didn't do that because they knew people wanted to do this, and they thought they could sell them more phones and more cars and everything that has them talking to each other. The auto industry guys, as a rule, who I know were, they were jealous of the tech companies and the telecoms and the phone manufacturers who were just minting money. Their share valuations were so high, whereas the auto industry, even now, they're having record profits. General Motors and Ford, and their shares are in the doldrums. Nothing they can do seems to raise them. So there was this moment when, it seemed like the phone companies ran out of phones to sell, like the market became mature, and the automobile industry was selling as many cars as it could. And suddenly, the automobile industry looked more exciting to the phone, the technology and phone companies than they had before. Everybody was saturated. So here's this whole new thing. Let's sell it all over again and for more money.
What's your best guess? Will we soon be seeing driverless cars and trucks on our roads and highways?
I think we will. I think it may be a little less dramatic in in the next 10 or 15 or 20 years than people imagine. There are still people say we're going to see flying cars. And that's a whole other story. But they've been talking about that for 70 years, and it was supposed to be right around the corner. But I think what we're more likely to see are cars that operate in convoys on interstates, and perhaps in cities where it's easier to maintain speeds and take advantage of all the anti-collision stuff, rather than what you would need to drive safely in a farm town in the Midwest.
A final question is, if we do have autonomous vehicles, has anyone given any thought as to who can operate these vehicles? In other words, I don't see any need to have a driver's license if you don't have to drive the car, but can children be allowed to travel by themselves in these vehicles? People who have never driven a car in their lives, would they be able to do it? Do you have any sense of that?
Those are some horrifying prospects you raised, Bob. The government certainly has the right to regulate that. States, but there are a million discussions, debates, fights to have about all that stuff, and quite a few risks.
Well, we're going to have to stop there, and I really appreciate this conversation.
Pleasure.
Thank you so much. We'll be back in a moment with a final word. The cover story in the latest Town and Country magazine is headlined, "Are You Rich Enough to Live Forever?" Well, I don't know about forever, but there's no doubt that big bucks can buy a longer life. Wealth and income inequality have increased in the United States to the point where the richest Americans can expect to live, on average, 10 to 15 years longer than their less wealthy fellow citizens. The absurd levels of inequality that we continue to see in the U.S. are taking a brutal toll. According to research by the British medical journal The Lancet, almost every chronic disease afflicting Americans follows a predictable pattern in which the prevalence of the disease rises as the level of income declines. The rich don't just get richer. As they monopolize more and more of our nation's resources, they get healthier and healthier, and they live longer and longer. While all this good stuff is happening for the very wealthy, life expectancy overall in the United States actually declined in the most recent data available from the National Center for Health Statistics. These are signs that our priorities as a society have gone haywire. The researchers at The Lancet compared the life expectancy of the wealthiest 1% of American men and women with those in the bottom 1%. Women in that top 1% can expect to live a little more than 10 years longer than their poorest counterparts. For men, the gap is even wider. Those in the top 1% live nearly 15 years longer than those at the bottom. This is unconscionable in a nation with the wealth and resources of the United States. What's worse is that Donald Trump and the Republican Party would like to make it even more difficult for less wealthy Americans to get the health care they need. If the GOP manages to get its way, the gap in life expectancy between the rich and the poor will widen even further. That's all for now. See you next time.